Hello, for a few minutes, I want to provide a real quick executive overview of the 4 ServiceNow GRC applications. From a policy and compliance perspective, policy and compliance helps you as an organization establish your governance framework. You leverage either internal proprietary authoritative sources and importing it into the platform, leveraging out-of-the-box content, or importing authoritative sources from your UCF subscription, which includes hundreds of authoritative sources, such as PCI, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, standards like ISOs, and the NIST 853 cybersecurity framework. Relating those to the policies allows an organization to then understand where they're at from a compliance perspective. From a policy overview, that we can define in the organization those controls that we have to adhere to, and continuously monitoring them using the policy and compliance application helps an enterprise control their actual risk exposure. On our policy overview dashboard, we're going to quickly see those things that were compliant, in this case the controls that we have that are compliant, things that may be in flight and yet to be assessed, and those that are non-compliant. From a compliance overview perspective, we take it a step further, and we're actually going to leverage the results of our continuous monitoring capabilities. And the continuous monitoring capabilities allows you to leverage data from across the entire ServiceNow ecosystem, whether it's change data, it's security incident data, or vulnerability data, to understand why an organization is non-compliant in a particular area, the policies that they're not compliant with, and what that exposure means to the organization. As we move into the risk application, our risk dashboard is going to give us visibility into the quantitative or the qualitative risk scoring methodology that we adopt, and we can see that from an inherent and a residual perspective. So from an inherent perspective, whether it's a qualitative approach, we can see the impact and the likelihood and all of the risks that we have in an organization on our heat map. We can also see that from a quantitative perspective by evaluating things like single loss expectancy, our annual rate of occurrence, and being able to chart then our actual loss expectancy in dollars so that we understand the actual risk exposure to the organization. Being able to quantify the risk to the business makes prioritizing easy. So high-risk issues are tackled first, and we see that information right at the top of our risk dashboard. Both from an inherent and a residual perspective, we can now focus on those things that are important to the business. As we move into our audit management application, we have visibility into bringing all of this information from a policy, compliance, and a risk perspective into one area. It's that trust but verify. We can know that the controls are in place, we can know that the policy is in place, we can know that risk assessments are occurring, but we need to validate that through test plans and control tests. We're going to evaluate the evidence that's been gathered in the policy and compliance application. We're going to evaluate information that may be available from a risk perspective, and we're going to understand from an asset-centric view of GRC how those different departments and business services or vendors or applications are doing from an audit perspective. We can actually see the different areas that we're drilling into or the controls that are within an individual audit engagements, and through the ability to publish an audit report that's going to have what was looked at from a scope perspective, what the results of that were and any of those findings, what the recommendations and the action plans, we're going to see what our audit scores are. In what places were we satisfactory, where do we need some help because we scored adequate, or really we can drill into those areas in our organization where we failed from an audit perspective. Finally, when we look at vendor risk, vendor risk is an application within the ServiceNow platform that's going to help us manage different areas. It's going to give us a vendor portfolio, and the vendor portfolio allows us to understand who our strategic partners are. The second part, it's going to allow us to provide assessments, and those assessments are going to be made up of questionnaires like the Standard Information Gathering or the SIG Lite and the SIG Full, and document requests where we can ask for a SOC 2 report or latest pen test results. Those assessments can be scheduled ad hoc or in a recurring manner, but those assessments are going to be delivered through a portal, and that's the third piece. And this portal is where we're actually going to allow the vendors to interact with the system interactively, be able to provide their responses, upload their documents, and provide information as part of the ServiceNow platform, and get you out of email, to take you out of the manual process of storing evidence on SharePoint sites or file shares and storing that information in email, and it gets them into the portal. And then the last piece of that is, as they provide the assessments, we're going to generate issues. Something that may be a gap that may needs to be addressed. Maybe they don't support things in a manner that you want them to support. So the issues management part of the vendor risk application is going to allow you to manage that in a record for history where people can go back and report on what the outcome was. And then finally, one other piece to that is that we're going to integrate that back to the other core internal GRC applications. So if in that case, the vendor doesn't support two-factor authentication or doesn't support a particular process within their organization, and you have an internal control within your organization that addresses that, their answers to questions for that vendor can automatically update one of your internal controls to non-compliant, thus increasing the risk to the organization that shows up then on the risk dashboard, so you can address that risk with that vendor proactively. Automating those processes within vendor risk and audit helps an organization save a tremendous amount of time and lets the team focus on high-value tasks. So that concludes the overview of the 4 ServiceNow GRC applications: policy and compliance, risk, audit, and vendor risk. Look at the ServiceNow website for additional information if you have any other questions.